Okay, so you just finished answering this question: when is it justified for the government to restrict our freedom? And what we're going to start doing now is seeing what philosophers and other legal theorists have said about this question. If you study what people have said, what we notice is that a lot of justifications fall into one of these four categories or under one of these four theories. So we're going to talk about them one by one. The first one is called the harm principle. You can see um, evidence for the harm principle, or one famous articulation of the harm principle, by a philosopher named John Stuart Mill. Incidentally, he's also one of the famous philosophers who talked about utilitarianism after Bentham. And he has another famous work called On Liberty. And in fact, he might be a little more famous for his talk on liberty and other political issues. And he says the only purpose for which power can be rightfully exercised over any member of a civilized community against his will is to prevent harm to others. His own good, either physical or mental, is not sufficient warrant. So, what John Stuart Mill is saying here is that the only justification a government would have for restricting somebody's freedom is in order to prevent harm to others. And this is somewhat aligned with a lot of what you said in the discussion assignment. The tricky part, though, is what's considered harm. What constitutes harm? Um, there's some really obvious cases of physical harm, so assault or murder or something like that. Most people would agree that that's the kind of harm that the law should intervene in order to prevent. Economic harm, being robbed, someone stealing the things that are rightfully yours. But what about emotional, mental, or psychological harm? Does that constitute harm? Is that obviously most of us can think of examples where that is harmful, but is it harmful enough for the government to intervene and make a law about it? So, um, things like what's in the bottom right corner, where this young man put on blackface, wrote "Wakanda Forever," and was hoping that this would offend someone. If that causes real emotional and psychological harm to somebody, is that the kind of thing that we also want to regulate through law? So, again, there's some pretty obvious um, cases of harm, things like murder, like we said, assault, even serious economic harm, like stealing or robbery. And then on the other end of the scale, there's things that are clearly not the kind of harm we want to regulate through law. Not to say it's not harmful, but it's not enough for us to regulate legally, and things that we could probably agree on. So things like just teasing, right? Making fun of somebody, that could be emotionally harmful, but if it's not very serious, we're not necessarily going to make a law about that, even though it does cause harm to somebody else. But then there's stuff like the thing I mentioned where um, somebody engages in racism that not only harms a person, but injures a group of people and maybe creates uh, an unsafe environment. Um, if you take it a little bit more to a little bit more extreme, what about, an organized white supremacist march, right? That's even more harmful than just one person putting on blackface. Um, is that so psychologically and mentally harmful that we want to make laws or rules about it? And could it lead to something that we think is obvious harm, like physical harm? Some of these issues we're going to talk about more in depth in the next unit or the next topic, which will be about the freedom of expression, which is a particular type of personal freedom that we want to sort of examine a little more closely. So we'll get into a lot more of those kind of details then. Um, let's take it one step further. So you have a young man in blackface, and then maybe an organized KKK march. Um, and then you have examples of like Nazi Germany, where the supremacism went so hard, so extreme, and was went so far that it actually led to a Holocaust, right? Now, what's interesting is, KKK march as of right now is still legal in the United States. You're allowed to do that. Um, in Germany, however, you are not allowed to have those kinds of demonstrations. You are not allowed to, um, in many places, display the Nazi symbols. It is actually against the law to do that. And some would say, well, doesn't that violate freedom of expression? Of course, we don't like it, but should they be allowed to do it? What I would like you to do, I'm going to pause this video again. What I would like you to do is maybe research a little bit about what are the laws in Germany, and then think about why might it make sense that in Germany these sorts of symbols have been made illegal, whereas in America it has not. And there is some justification for why it's different in these two countries. You may think that it should be the same, like even in America, they shouldn't be allowed. But there is a difference between the two countries that leads to this difference in the law. So I want you to think about that a little bit, do a little bit of research, and write in this assignment why you think in Germany these sorts of symbols are not allowed, whereas in America it is not illegal. Okay, and then we'll come back and continue this topic.